Hello and welcome back to NewsX World. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching Focal Length, where we get you a briefing on topics from across the globe. From war in Ukraine and escalating trade disputes to NATO's Arctic strategy and the controversy over Greenland, transatlantic relations are under strain. American unilateralism, European strategic ambitions and great power rivalries are raising a fundamental question. Is the Western alliance adapting to a new world or slowly losing its relevance? To discuss this, we're joined by Theo Zenou, a visiting fellow at the Australian National University. Based in London, his work focuses on power, geopolitics and the evolving global order. Thank you very much for joining us, Theo. It's a pleasure to have you here on the programme.
It's great to be on. Thank you.
Let's get straight into this. Critics argue that US-Europe relations are crumbling under American unilateralism under President Donald Trump. Do you agree that Europe's growing resentment towards US policies on Ukraine and energy is pushing the alliance towards irrelevance?
Yes, that's undeniable. Donald Trump, since he's come back into office last year, has tested, abused, and potentially repaired beyond damage the European-American alliance, and we've seen that over the last 2 weeks with his threats toward Greenland, no doubt. However, what we should also remember is the alliance is still very much in place, right? NATO still exists. American military is still in Europe and still provide by far most intelligence, targeting capabilities of NATO. They are still, despite trade tensions, incredible commerce going on between both countries. So whilst the relationship might evolve, it's still very strong as it is when you actually look at the facts, if you take away the rhetoric of the politicians. So we shouldn't be too alarmist either.
And of course, the Greenland row, as you've mentioned, the US has brazenly floated buying the territory, exposed deep fissures in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Has this Trump-era fiasco permanently eroded trust among allies, or is it just a symptom of America's imperial overreach?
It's probably too early to say. I mean, Trump has attacked and abused Europeans before, and they've come back from it and continued the relationship because America is so powerful that Europe needs America. However, this time it was a bit different because the US didn't just flout buying Greenland, it flouted invading Greenland. Now, Trump has walked this back, but that was a shock for Europeans to think that America could go to war against the sovereign territory of a European nation. That should be a game changer. If Europeans mean what they say, it's a big if, then yes, it would permanently damage a relationship. The problem now is that the Europeans must act. They must do more than simply go to Davos and give great speeches. I'm French, my president gave a great speech in Davos. Good, but actions need to follow words. And Europeans love to pat themselves on the back. But as far as acting as Europeans, they have not been up to the task. And what they should do first and foremost is to unify Europe politically, to create a stronger, more federal European Union so that the next time this happens, Europe has more power. Europe can act unilaterally, just like the US does. However, you'll notice that we're not hearing talks about this in Europe.
And of course, tariffs under Donald Trump flying back and forth. Between the EU and the United States, they're visible on the surface of a much deeper strategic economic rivalry and not just a narrow trade dispute. Is the US-EU, if you could call it a trade war, really about competition, or is it just thinly veiled American power plays to kneecap Europe's economic resurgence post-pandemic?
So there is a lot in that question. Currently, there is no real trade war. Donald Trump did not go through with his threat of tariffs over Greenland. He walked them back. The EU and the US have a trade deal. It's been slowed down now, but the plan is still very much to bring it forward at a later date. I don't think the US is trying to prevent Europe from having a post-COVID resurgence, because actually Europe isn't really having a great economic time and hasn't been having a great economic time for the last few years. The two most powerful economies in Europe are France and Germany, and both are very troubled. Underinvestments. So you have to look at tariffs from the point of view of Donald Trump. What Donald Trump does is he uses tariff as a weapon to bully and to threaten. And he doesn't just do this to Europe. He's done this to Southeast Asia. He's done this to Latin American countries. And so he takes this method to the Europeans and says, if you won't do my bidding, in this case it was Greenland, tariffs. If you won't under-regulate American company, tariffs. It's not so much about what it does to the European economy or how it benefits the US. It's really about a power play, as you mentioned.
And moving on now, in this ruthless arena of great power competitions that we're seeing in today's day and age, are the US, China and Russia irreversibly dismantling the post-World War II international norms? And who's truly the biggest hypocrite in this geopolitical free-for-all that we're seeing in 2025, even to the first month of 2026?
So that's another huge question. We're still trying to walk our way through this, and there is no definitive. I actually wouldn't say that the US, Russia, or China are pending the post-95 world order. I would say they are pending the post-1990 world order, right? So after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War, we had a very unique moment in human history where there was really only one primal power, which was the United States. And we had this illusion of global framework of governance. Now that's definitely going away. And as you suggested, we're moving back towards a multipolar world where countries are being more aggressive. However, a multipolar world would imply that all the poles are equally as powerful or influential. That is not the case. We're moving into a multipolar world where there are still basically two very strong poles, one being the US, the other being China. So in some ways, we're moving back to the post-World War II world, where there will be two broad camps. One will be behind the US, one will be behind China. And much like during the Cold War, we forget this. There were many countries, middle powers or small powers, as we call them today, that were hedging their bets. They were going toward the US, going toward the Soviets. They were called a non-aligned movement. And we will see that happen once again. And it will be the ability of China and the US to impose their will that will be key to the coming world order.
And post-Greenland debacle, if you can call it post, has NATO's Arctic strategy become a farce riddled with paranoia over territorial grabs? And what brutal realities must member states confront to avoid being outmaneuvered by rivals like Russia?
So the Arctic is generally very, very important. Donald Trump is right. And Russia and China have designs on the Arctic. Because of climate change, there will be new sea lanes and shipping lanes that will open. There will also be greater access to minerals and potentially oil. And the Arctic is also very strategic when it comes to defense and ballistic missiles in particular. The US, this is not the fault of Trump, just Trump, it's also the fault of previous president, has not really cared that much about the Arctic since the end of the Cold War. Russia has continued to militarize. It, at the moment, has the advantage in the Arctic. China, if you look at the map, is quite far from the Arctic, yet China calls itself a near-Arctic power and collaborates with Russia in order to get into the Arctic. So it's very, very important for the US to work with European allies to secure its interests in the Arctic. If the US starts to alienate Europe, then it will be a mess, and the winners will be Russia and China. And as far as the Europeans are concerned, not just in the Arctic, but in Europe, they have to get serious about defense spending. European armies are not up to the task if they do not have American support with NATO. Europe has been underinvesting in defense for my entire lifetime, basically, since the end of the Cold War. And we've been very happy to let America take care of our defense. We've been very happy to do it. And in fact, when you look at Donald Trump's problematic, aggressive attitude toward the Europeans, while it's deplorable, it's not that shocking because Trump fundamentally uses every leverage he can to obtain concessions. And the Europeans, for decades now, have given America the biggest leverage you can, which is they don't have a defense and they rely on the US for their defense. So Trump is right that Europeans should invest a lot more in defense and grow up. And as Europeans, I say we, because I am a European, we shouldn't be afraid of hard power. We should enter a new era of strategic autonomy where, again, Europe unifies in order to have a defense and a political union. And at the moment, it has neither.
Indeed. Just a quick one, Theo. Do you think Donald Trump respects Europe, given all the comments that he's made about NATO and, of course, his national security strategy, where he labels it going through a cultural crisis, among other issues that he rose? Plenty of problems there raised by the US president. But do you think there is still respect there for the European continent from Donald Trump?
No, I think there is no respect. But I think there is no respect from Donald Trump towards most other countries. Because at the end of the day, the world we're moving back into is a world where power is what earns you respect. And in a sense, this has always been the case in the history of humanity. So Trump can only respect power. So if Europeans want to be respected by Trump, but going forward in the 21st century, by China, by Russia, by India, by countries like Brazil and Indonesia that will become more and more important, Europe has to be powerful. This is a key message, and this is a key thing the European leaders have to do if they want Europe to thrive in the coming century. They have to embrace power, and they have to embrace a doctrine of power.
Dr. Theo Zenou, thank you very much for joining us. It was a great pleasure talking to you here on Focal Length.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Well, that's all that we have time for on this episode. For more international news and updates, stay tuned on NewsX World.